The Sami Zayn situation, I mean, a lot of people love the storyline with Sami Zayn and the bloodline here, Ralph. We even had this conversation last week about whether or not it should be Sami Zayn that challenges Roman Reigns at WrestleMania and even dethrone Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. But I kind of had a thought of this last week after we were done recording. Sami Zayn, I think one of the reasons why people love him so much, obviously he's a great wrestler in ring, but he's a great character outside of matches, and he's been hilarious with the Uzi stuff or whatever. Now you have people saying he should be world champion, or at least in the conversation of world champion. But I feel like we've had this discussion before elsewhere where you have a comedy wrestler that's a good wrestler, well-loved by fans, and some even say he should be in the talks for world championship and even challenged for a world championship a couple years ago. And that's Orange Cassidy. Where's the difference between WWE Universe and Sami Zayn supporting him to this run against Roman Reigns versus the AEW fan that believes Orange Cassidy's in the conversation as a main eventer and a world champion at one point in AEW? Where's the difference? Because it's essentially the same thing, I think, where a comedy wrestler who's good at wrestling that is over with their fan base want him to be a world champion.
The characters themselves, you can absolutely draw comparisons and parallels and say they're very similar in the sense that you have two comedy guys, like you just said, that can both wrestle, both get positive receptions from the fans and cheered and everything else. And they both probably are going to play an underdog role in a majority of the matches that they're going to have.
Mm-hmm.
The difference, the biggest glaring difference to me is the story. Sami Zayn is in a storyline where he's essentially trying to earn the trust a majority of the year and the respect and the good faith of the bloodline and impress Roman Reigns.
Mm-hmm.
He's essentially, they built this up for a very long time. Most people probably didn't think, including myself, that Sami Zayn was going to be able to get himself over to the point where now we're automatically talking about his potential involvement in a championship match. Now, for me, and what I think, if they're going to go that route with Sami Zayn, and you know this because I said it last week, Sami Zayn, as you said, is a comedic wrestler. Nobody's going to buy him as a dominant champion. I mean, he doesn't have the look. He doesn't have the physique. Nobody's going to, you can't put Roman and him next to each other and convince a fan who's never watched wrestling that they're at the same level. Because one looks like a sports athlete and one guy looks like you'd find him at a belly up at a bar somewhere or something like that. He looks like an average guy.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do it, I said, look, there's going to have to be outside interference involving Kevin Owens. Again, they've already have that storyline kind of built into it. So there is a storyline that is leading into this. And if he wins, he has to lose the belt probably the next night or have a short title reign. It's very similar in the sense that, remember when Christian won the title and I think he lost it like after a week to Randy Orton because Christian at that time, WWE was very different. You had to be the bigger guy to be a champion and all that type of stuff. And it's different now, but that's where the difference is. If they're going to put Orange Cassidy in a storyline in a faction where all of a sudden, like, it makes sense because the story dictates it makes sense for him to dethrone a well-established champion. Like it just, I can't put my finger on it. It's like, look, that's one of the things that you can point to and say, look, this is the climax of what has been a great storyline. Not just, okay, well, he's Orange Cassidy. He's beloved by the fans. He sells t-shirts. So naturally he should be a champion at some point. I don't agree with that. I think if they can build a storyline that is equivalent to what they've done with the bloodline, and he's involved in a faction along with a strong champion, and it makes sense for him to dethrone that champion, I would be all for it. But I don't think he should have this long drawn out championship reign and present himself as a dominant champion. And I think that I have the same feelings for Sami Zayn.
So say Orange Cassidy gets another shot at the world championship. We know he had it before against Pac and Kenny Omega at Double or Nothing a couple years back. And we know he almost won the match, but thanks to Don Callis, he was interfered with and Kenny Omega ended up winning the match, right? Suppose they revisit that and Kenny Omega gets the title back down the line somewhere, whether it's dethroning MJF or MJF drops it to Hangman Page per se. They revisit Omega versus Page, and Omega beats Page this time around. Then we revisit Orange Cassidy versus Kenny Omega. And the storyline is there. Like, Orange Cassidy had Kenny beat. He had Kenny beat. And that's the story that you have going into the championship match. And Orange Cassidy beats Kenny Omega. Would you be okay with that?
If you asked me this question about Sami Zayn a year ago, I would have told you no.
Yeah.
I need to see the story. It needs to be real time, because this happens so many times in pro wrestling where it's like, a lot of times we don't foresee somebody getting over. We didn't see Bryan Danielson or Daniel Bryan at the time being the guy that was going to lead a yes movement. We didn't foresee Kofi Mania. We didn't see Sami Zayn getting over to this level. And maybe at some point we won't see Orange Cassidy being the guy that makes sense. If you're asking me right now to say, okay, well, imagine if this happened, I would say no. Because I need to have my finger on the pulse and say, okay, well, yeah, it absolutely makes sense. If Orange Cassidy is super over and the storyline makes sense for him to somehow get a cheap victory, a surprise victory, a fluke victory over a champion that he wouldn't beat 9 times out of 10, and he carries that title for maybe a week and loses it, I'd be okay with it. But it has to make sense storyline-wise. Mm-hmm. This happens all of the time in pro sports. I think sometimes we forget that it does happen. Many times in boxing, UFC, whatever, you have guys that are ranked higher, like nobody's supposed to have a chance. One of the biggest upsets was Matt Serra coming back from essentially retirement, fighting George St. Pierre, who's one of the best ever, and knocking him out. It does happen.
Right.
It's the same
Even
thing
Buster
that we
Douglas knocking out
exactly.
Tyson.
And Logan Paul. I mean, look at the storyline with Logan Paul. And, it's essentially the same thing. You're going to get people that are going to hate on that. Oh, well, Logan Paul, the one lucky punch, he shouldn't be having this. Yeah, I get it. And I don't know if it should have been as competitive as it should have been, but it was. And to pretend that those things don't happen in real life, it's disingenuous. Mm-hmm. Do I think Orange Cassidy is a dominant champion? Do I think he's somebody that can main event and carry titles and, carry a title for 6 months to a year? No. I don't see him as that. I see him as exactly what he is.
He's held the All-Atlantic Championship for at least 3 months now, I think.
Heavyweight championship.
Heavyweight championship. That's a different argument, but
yes.
As a champion, they kind of are testing it right now with the All-Atlantic Championship, maybe.
Correct. It's a mid-card title. So I said that from the beginning, like, that's a decent title for him. He could do his thing. He can have his matches. He's a good wrestler. That's fine. But some people say, just based on his character right now as it presents himself, he's a main eventer and he should be a champion someday. Based on this, if you took Sami Zayn out of the bloodline, and let's go back to when he was competing against Johnny Knoxville. If we had the same conversation at WrestleMania time last year, and you said, hey, should Sami Zayn be the guy to dethrone Roman Reigns? Nobody's going to say yes.
A lot of people were saying he was buried because he lost to Johnny Knoxville.
And we were the only ones that said, hey, 2 guys that lost coming out of WrestleMania, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, proved more than almost anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
We were the only ones that, well, maybe not the only ones, but one of the few, maybe the,
we were in the minority. We were in the minority in that, saying
yes.
that they actually benefited from their losses because they came out of that in a higher stock than they were
yes.
going into WrestleMania, even though they lost to a retired Stone Cold Steve Austin and Johnny Knoxville.
Yes. And what you have here is real life examples of why the story, and we talk about this all the time, and the characters and the personalities is more important than the work rate many, 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 many times. Mm-hmm. You can have these dream matches and it's good for one night and it's good for the one-offs and it's good for the fans that are really entrenched in all of everything. But the story can help set somebody up for that next step. Mm-hmm. That's what essentially has gotten Sami Zayn to the point where now people maybe consider him to be the guy that can dethrone Roman. Some people would still say no.
Right.
So if the storyline dictates that Orange Cassidy should win a title, as long as it's in some weird fashion, I would be okay with it.
It has to make sense.
The same thing. Yes, the storyline has to has to let me believe. It has to make sense.
Right.
Yeah, the storyline has to dictate it.
And that's all we're asking for. Is something to make sense. Again, it is a television show. Pro wrestling is a form of sports entertainment. Regardless if you want to disagree with that, try to define pro wrestling without it making it sound like sports entertainment. And all you're probably going to do is just say the things you hate about sports entertainment and say that's not pro wrestling, but it's all a form of sports entertainment. Nonetheless, I really want to get the babble sections, ideas on this. How would you get Orange Cassidy to the World Championship? How would you get Sami Zayn to the Undisputed WWE Universal Championship? How do you build those stories? I'd love to see some of the fantasy booking in the Babble section. Let us know in the comment section. Let us know by tweeting us at SCPB Podcast, sending us direct messages on Instagram and Facebook, or sending us an email at scpbpodcast@gmail.com. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to see what you guys got. Don't forget to share us all over social media. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Squared Circle Psycho Babble.